Setbacks are temporary, but comebacks, they are legendary. Welcome back to the PSI Effect, where we pause, shift, and ignite purpose that speaks louder than your past. This is Neug, and together with Franky, we're your hosts in this space, and your comeback starts now.
Welcome to this special Halloween edition of the PSI Effect Podcast. And as you notice, Franky and I are masked up. This is our topic, and you can see that, or you can hear, my voice is a little muffled. This mask is a little warm, and I think it gives credence to some of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about how we grew up wearing costumes for different things and what we had to go through and the challenges of wearing a mask. And one of the challenges for this mask is the heat in here, and my bald head is starting to sweat.
Time to take them off. Yeah, it's amazing just wearing that mask for that short amount of time, the impact that it had on us. I mean, granted, we look pretty awesome in our Halloween costumes, and I think that's only appropriate for our Halloween special. But man, what a price we just paid.
Yeah. So, Franky, now that we got those masks off, we can get down to business and do the work.
Yeah.
How's things going for you this week, brother?
It's a busy week. It's coming up on Halloween. While not a kid anymore, I still enjoy that space, and it's always a lot of activities. Either with the school, with the kids, or just in the neighborhood. But things are going well. It reminds me of when I was a younger person running around on Halloween and all the mischief that we would get into, wearing the masks and the costumes. It was a little crazy. I mean, especially out here in the country, it was a little bit different. But Nude, you grew up in the city, right? What was Halloween like in the city space?
Halloween in the city space, during the time I was going out trick or treating, if you will, it was very different. We were living in a time where folks were starting to do some evil things to kids, putting bad things in the candy and so forth. We were very cautious, or my parents were very cautious. And so we would go trick-or-treating, but only to the houses, for our neighbors that they actually knew. And we didn't stray too far from the neighborhood or that kind of thing. Or even we would go to, house parties where some of the parents would have parties for the kids for Halloween and that kind of thing. So it was very different, I will say, especially from what I see, in the kids in the neighborhood today.
Yeah, well, the experience out here in the country was totally different because, out here where I am, there's no street lights. The houses aren't close together. So the way it would work for us, everybody would get in their costumes. And I have some of the fondest memories of jumping in the back of my dad's pickup truck. And he would have, 8 to 10 kids in the back of the pickup truck, just slow rolling, through the community, stopping at the different houses. Very similarly, stopping at the houses that you knew for family members and folks that were, familiar to you. And man, it was just an awesome time. One of the best things was, figuring out what costume you were going to wear. And man, were those costumes back in the day they were kind of suspect, because I distinctly remember, costumes that where the part you would wear on your body was made out of this like stinky vinyl plastic. As soon as you put, you got this basically a plastic suit that you're wearing that just smells terrible. You're sweating your face off. You're sweating in places that you don't want to be sweating while you're trick-or-treating. You got a mask on, without my glasses, I can't see anything anyway. So have to take my glasses off to put the mask on. Oh man, it was an ordeal. You're dealing with all this stuff because of the costume. But we were still able to get out there and be mischievous in a good way. And then, still get the objective of securing that bag of candy.
That was the goal, right? To get those treats. But I remember those masks too. We had those plastic masks with the little single elastic strap behind your head. And
oh yeah,
I just remember those things would just like cut into my face. And I just, as much as I didn't enjoy wearing them, I did enjoy the activities surrounded around getting those treats and getting them all.
Yeah, it's a price. It's a price that we pay.
Absolutely. Well, today we're going to talk about being in the mask and what that means. So, as we go through life, there's, different things that arise, tensions that arise between who we think we are, or who we perceive ourselves to be, and how we project ourselves on the outside or to the outside world. So, masks seem to enable that projection that we have on the outside world. So the bigger the gap between who we are and the mask that we wear, the more energy that we have to expend to maintain that facade, right?
Right.
So in this episode, we're going to talk about the origins of the mask and the mask in our lives, which is, might be a little deep subject for some of us. We're going to seek to try to understand how wearing the mask impacts the trajectory of our lives. So the authors being the authors of our comeback. So we're going to talk about some of that kind of stuff today. So what say you, Mr. Franky?
Well, I mean, these masks have to come from somewhere. You go to Party City nowadays, or what is it called? Spirit Halloween, all these different franchises, and all they'd have are wall-to-wall masks. Those masks are manufactured somewhere. And, I imagine that the masks that we put on as we navigate life and as we navigate our comebacks, they're manufactured somewhere too. Something in our lives, each mask that we wear, because many times we have different masks that we put on depending on the situation, but each mask has a trigger that, prompted us to initially pick it up and prompts us to put it on and take it off as we're navigating through things. So, when we think about it, some of the masks that we wear may come from things we experienced in our childhood. They may come from expectations that are placed on us by family, friends, work. They may be rooted in just fear, fear of not being enough, fear of not being accepted. There are all sorts of sources for these masks that we pick up.
And that's interesting that you say that. There was as I was kind of researching the topic for this episode, I found that there was a Harvard study that was done that said that most children, by the time that they're 7 or 8 years old, have learned to mask their emotions, right? And you talk about fear, sadness, or just even to, avoid punishment or rejection of some sort. And I found that real interesting that by the age of 7 or 8 years old, that kids have that, what they probably believe is a safety mechanism to keep them from being hurt.
And that's interesting too, that it would be that early. But you think about that though, 7 or 8, that puts them, maybe first, second grade in terms of schooling. So that's the point in time where they're starting to have relationships and interactions with people, and they're starting to become more self-aware. So to me, it seems like that might be rooted in the maturation of an idea that maybe the real me isn't enough. And maybe that's the trigger that, starts us off on that early track of wearing the mask. The real me being sad, I'm going to get picked on, so let me put this mask on. Or the real me that, likes coloring in my coloring book. That's not cool. So I'm going to put this mask on like I don't like that type of thing. Or the real me of feeling a certain way is going to make my parents mad. So let me put on this mask.
Absolutely. During that age too, is when you learn stuff like, you got to be strong. Don't cry, right? Don't you cry. Boy, don't you cry, especially if you got into a little, fight with the neighborhood kids, you better get back out there, go out there and protect yourself. If they hit you, hit them back kind of thing. You just couldn't show weakness, right? That was the thing. That was part of some of what was taught, not just inside the home, but outside the home, right? That was just some of the things that you learned. And then in my environment, trust me, you had to be a little tough. So, but you learned that at a very, very young age. So Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, an early experience too was around that whole tough guy mentality, and I don't know if that's a virtue of the time in which we were raised. I think it's still around now, where there's this perception that as a young male, you're supposed to act in a particular way. So I ended up picking up this mask, and the thing about it too, it wasn't coming from my household. It wasn't from my parents. My parents never told me, like, you better not cry, or, you got to be this tough guy. It was a persona that I picked up, a mask that I picked up on my own based off of my interactions with, friends at school, cousins and family that were kind of the same age as me. You think about, I grew up, some of my formative years were in the 80s. I'm dating myself a little bit. But you think about the types of movies that were really ubiquitous during the 80s. That was really the heyday of, like, the Schwarzenegger and Stallone and, this big, tough action, burly guy. I'm not afraid of anything. I don't have time to cry. I don't have time to bleed. And I think some of that was an influence on me picking up that tough guy mask, when in actuality, I'll cry in a minute. Still, as a grown up, I'll cry at a movie. Yeah, I'm not afraid of those emotions nowadays, but back then, oh man, I would do anything in my power to try to cover that up.
Yeah, man, I had to be the tough guy too back in that day, because for whatever reason, you wouldn't think so looking at me today, but for whatever reason, growing up, man, I was always the smallest kid in the neighborhood. And I was small. I was thin. I was short. And honestly thought I was going to be short my entire life. And so, in the environment where I grew up, I mean, and you talk about how different it may be, but back in that day, we were outside. We were outside all the time. We were interacting with people our age all the time. And so that whole personality dynamic and those clashes that you have with one another, and just learning and figuring that stuff out, there would be fights and disagreements and what have you. And being the smallest kid in the neighborhood, I had to show some type of bravado, or at least pretend to, because everybody in that neighborhood was bigger than me.
Gotta watch out for those small ones, man. They're the feistiest ones.
Hey, I'm telling you, it was crazy. In hindsight,
Yeah, and the thing that interests me too is, those were masks that we picked up. At least for me, that was nobody necessarily pushed me to put that mask on. That was something I picked up. So, Neug, what do you think? You think there's a difference between masks that we pick up and choose to wear ourselves versus masks that other people put on us?
I think it's different only in the sense of how those masks are formed. But at the end of the day, it's still an alteration of who you really are, what your personality really is. So I think how they form upon you is different. But ultimately, the mask is a mask. They can be hiding your true self, not just from what you project to the outside world, but also what you perceive yourself to be internally.
Yeah. I like that. A mask is definitely going to, whether you put it on or somebody else puts it on you, it's definitely going to hide or distort, who you really are. To me, though, that one of the distinct differences is, if I choose to put it on, I think that I would be more susceptible or more inclined to wear it longer. It was a choice that I made. I put it on, whereas somebody putting it on me would feel more like confinement or constraint, or somebody trying to control me. While it may still have the same outcome, the feeling, I think, would be different for me. And I reflect back to, I hate to say it, but I reflect back to COVID and just how viscerally people responded to a mask mandate during that period. We're talking about health concerns and all that, which is totally different than these masks of our personalities, but thematically it's very similar in the response. People were told to wear a mask, and a lot of folks didn't like it because that's something that we were being told to do.
That's very true. I remember very distinctly that time and how frustrated and upset that people were for wearing those masks. So that's a very good point. But the way you describe it, it's like or what I liken it to, how you describe it to me, is the mask that you put on yourself is like, putting on a shirt and the shirt fits because you have the right size.
Mm-hmm.
And a mask that somebody puts on you is a tight fit. It's the wrong size, right? Or it's too big or what have you. So you're more comfortable in the mask that you create for yourself.
Yeah, and it seems like it can be rather innocuous too, the way that those masks that other people put on us come about. I think about it from a parenting perspective in thinking about this topic today. Is like, what masks am I putting on my children by the things that I'm trying to push them down? They're like, am I putting this mask of being an overachiever on my child? Am I trying to force my kid to wear the tough guy mask? Am I trying to put the mask of, having all your stuff together? Because I think that's a mask that a lot of folks wear, and sometimes it's pushed on them of like, yo, yeah, I have this mask of, I've got my stuff together. So, what mask am I pushing on people?
And that's the question for our audience. So like, looking back, what mask did you start wearing at a young age, right? And what prompted you to wear it, which is what I think you just alluded to. And how did it help you or hinder you as you making your journey through life? So let's talk about some common types of masks, and you alluded to that too. So there's all kinds of masks that we may have in our closet, right? And so there's a few here, a list, and maybe we can talk about one or two that we maybe associate with or have associated with. And you talked about, the perfectionist. Then there's the people pleaser, and the I've got it all together mask, the tough guy or girl persona, the joker, and the silent absorber, somebody hiding in the background to avoid judgment, right? And then in the joker, I should mention that's a mask that we wear sometimes where we use humor to deflect some sort of pain that we're going through. Give us an example, Frankie, of one or two of those that you may have associated with over time.
Man, how much time do we have? Good gracious. Because the masks that we choose out of that costume closet of masks, I mean, all of us have a variety, and it's very much situationally dependent. Depending on what we're going through at the time, it could change throughout the day. So any of these could pop out at any time. Two of them that kind of stick out to me. One was the silent observer. I wore that a lot in my youth because I felt like I didn't fit in. And, I had all these internal thoughts and these internal dialogue and things like that, but I was very reluctant. I was shy, and I was reluctant to engage because, I thought my ideas were just like way out there in left field or different. So, I had all these ideas. I had a huge imagination, but I was reluctant to get out there and share it. So I just kind of stood back and was a wallflower to kind of see what was going on around me, to see how other folks were acting. And it was that mask was a way for me to kind of gauge the room before I decided to engage, to put myself out there, because I was afraid to be vulnerable and share, the true, imaginative ideas that I had or the crazy thoughts that I may have had going through my head. So that silent observer allowed me to just sit back and avoid that risk. And then the other one, the Joker, manifested for me in my youth, probably around middle school, and this one was a little more nefarious. So in middle school years, that's when a lot of folks start to kind of develop their personalities and things like that. And I encountered some racism from classmates. And rather than really expose or let them know how much the things they said or did hurt me, I put on the Joker mask to laugh it off and keep things moving and to just get through the day. In hindsight, oh man, I wish I hadn't have worn that mask, but as a middle schooler, I'm just trying to get through the day. And I'm sure there are times in my adult life where that mask has come out, where a situation has not been good for me and I've been hurt by it. And rather than acknowledging and addressing that hurt, that pain with the individual or group, I just put on the Joker mask and, laugh my way through it until I can get to a place and gather myself.
Yeah, that pain, that emotional pain is real.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that between us, we can come up with a few really good stories that we can associate with, growing up, and our audience as well. And even today, I mean, it's still that emotional pain just does not, doesn't diminish over time. I mean, it's still painful when you have your, feelings hurt, your emotions, take over. For me, I mentioned the tough guy mask, and I wore that for a lot of years, man. I wore it for a lot of years because I was the smallest kid in the neighborhood for a very long time. That summer growth spurt that kids do didn't come until late, and so I had many years of trying to be or projecting to be tougher than maybe I was. I mean, there were some kids in the neighborhood that I fought and got picked on by, and I wanted to avoid them kids, but I couldn't. I mean, they were in the neighborhood next door, up the street, on the way to school, whatever. I mean, they were there. So, I had to. I felt like I had to put on that tough guy persona, just as you said, to get through the day, to get through the week. And, I too associate with the silent observer because there were, part of that tough guy persona. I had to do it when I had to do it, right? I had to be that person when I had to be that person. But I would kind of step back into the shadows a little bit because I think I was avoiding those situations with those bigger kids. And I just didn't want to put myself out there and, have to get into a situation that was, not good. So for our audience, take some time and list out the different masks that you wear, different masks that are in your costume closet, so to speak. And, how do you decide when and where that you're going to wear them, right? And then also think about why do you think you even need it? Do some internal reflection, take a personal inventory of some of that and see where you come out and what direction that you may need to go in from there.
Yep, that's definitely a time to pause. Let's take some time, audience, as a moment to just do that internal reflection, because it's self-awareness is a key part of understanding, these masks that are in our environment. And now we're about to shift as we talk about understanding what it's really costing us to wear these masks. And there's a quote, and I share this with my kids all the time, is that when you say yes to something, you're implicitly saying no to something else. So when we say yes to wearing the mask, what are some of the things that we're saying no to? What are some of the costs that we're incurring by wearing these masks? What do you think, Neug?
Well, certainly I think that, we're suppressing something in ourselves when we say yes to things, when we really want to say no. And I think that is a cost because it truly affects our personal persona, who we really are, versus the mask that we're wearing. And, according to the American Psychology Association, they said that people who suppress emotions regularly are 30 to 40% more likely to develop anxiety or depression. And, we had that episode where we talked about anxiety. Yes. And we talked about this a little bit. And so, when you, from the quote that you just gave, I just think that when you suppress things that you really don't want to suppress, so when you say yes to things when you really want to say no, that suppression is part of what can be detrimental to you, to your personal mental health, the anxiety, the depression, and what have you.
Yeah, and it has to be emotionally exhausting. If you're wearing this mask, if you're saying yes to wearing this mask, you're saying no to a lot of other things just because you're expending so much energy maintaining this external projection that isn't necessarily you. I have a former colleague, and we did one of those personality assessments that you do. You know how they do at work. Sometimes they'll have you take one of those personality assessments to kind of see, what are your intrinsic strengths or what are your intrinsic capabilities and things like that. Those are great, by the way. And, this colleague, they took it and we were discussing it after the fact. And as we were getting through it, he posed the question. He's like, well, did you guys take this from the perspective of being at home or being at work? And that really suggested to me is like, all right, who you are at work is not who you are when you're at the house or when you're not at work. And how exhausting does that have to be when you think about how much time we spend at work, all the different situations we have to navigate at work. If we then add another layer of interpreting all that through a mask that isn't who we really are, how much energy are you expending? How exhausting does that have to be to keep wearing that mask?
That's a lot of work.
Right.
That is a lot of work, man, because I tell you, being at work and trying to do a good job, right? What have you, and interacting with so many different personalities, I think it's really difficult to be who you really are because, like it or not, believe it or not, I just think that in that environment, you're being judged from all different angles, right? And, there are people who are going to agree, disagree. And in that space, when you're out in public and you're in your own world, it's easy to say, well, it really doesn't matter what they think, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in that space, when you're in the workspace, it matters. It matters a whole lot. And I think people find themselves in pressure cookers when they're trying to navigate some of that. And I think that, there are some people who do it seemingly well and others who absolutely fail. And I can tell you, when you talk about how exhausting it is, you hear people say when they get home from work, I'm emotionally drained, right? I'm emotionally exhausted.
Yeah.
And that's what I think that comes from, is just trying to navigate what can sometimes be a minefield in the workspace. And it's really unfortunate. And I know that there's been studies done that said that, between 20 and I think 40% of the people who open up and who are honest are perceived to be trustworthy, at work, as opposed to those who are not. And, I wasn't part of that study. I don't know if that 20 or 40% is too high or too low.
Right.
But what I can tell you is that, I've worked with some people who were very forthcoming with who they were, and they weren't very trustworthy. So I think it can work both ways. And I think that it really does take a lot out of you, or it can take a lot out of you every day.
Yeah. And in addition to the emotional exhaustion that wearing the mask can cause us, another one of those costs is it impedes our ability to connect and interact with people. Specifically, if I'm wearing a mask and I'm coming to interact with you, the connection that we establish is fractured because you're connecting with the mask that I'm projecting. And then again, we fall into that loop of, okay, I have to expend this emotional energy to maintain this projection so that I can maintain this connection with you. So, you disconnect from other people when you wear that mask because they're not seeing the real you.
Yeah, and I think inherently, we want to be our true selves. I really think that we want to be our true selves, but I think it's how we're perceived by other people sometimes in certain situations is when those masks come out, and it could be from experience. You've experienced that type of behavior from people before, and so you don't want to have that experience again, and so just whip out that mask, right? So I don't know. I think there's a lot that goes into it. Hopefully one day we can get a psychologist in this space to kind of help us with some of these things, because we're talking about our personal experiences, and we're not trained therapists or anything, but it would be interesting to see or hear the some professional who has the education behind the science and help us out with some of this.
Yeah. And another cost before we get off that subject that we have to be really aware of if we're wearing a mask is that, especially if we're wearing the mask to hide some of our wounds, like we've had some trauma, we've been hurt, and we put on a mask to try to hide that hurt. Wearing that mask can impede our healing process. It can impede our growth. In previous episodes, we've talked about how failure is a data point that we can use as a building block into growth, and, bouncing back from discomfort, and embracing it can help us to move forward. But if we're wearing a mask to try to cover up that wound or that hurt, it can definitely detract from our growth, detract from our healing journey. So we have to be very careful about how that mask comes into play in those scenarios.
Yeah, and talk about the hollow success. You had mentioned that in a previous episode, and I think wearing the mask too can give you that feeling of emptiness through success. Talk about that if you remember what you were speaking on in that episode.
Yeah. So if we're wearing this mask, right, and we're projecting to be something that we're not. When we get that victory, it's almost like, I imagine it being, this is what I imagine being an actor is like. So if I was a blockbuster actor and, let's say I'm Denzel Washington and everybody loves the character that Denzel plays, and all this admiration is on that character, not on Denzel the actor, right? So take it to another actor like, James Earl Jones, the voice of Darth Vader in the Star Wars space. I've already mentioned before how much I'm a James Earl Jones fan, and everybody knows I'm a Star Wars nerd. So that iconic voice, so many people love that voice because it's associated with Darth Vader. But those accolades are being put on that character, not on the actual person behind it. And I view wearing a mask in much the same way. We achieve these victories, but that victory gets kind of associated with the mask that we're wearing, and not one that we can truly claim for ourselves. So that contributes to the feeling of hollowness from those victories when we're wearing a mask.
So let's ask our audience again to think back, refer to, or take an inventory of the mask in your costume closet. And what does it truly cost you to wear the mask? Because it costs you something. And you may not even be aware of what it costs right now, but take inventory of that and think about what that mask costs you to wear. So we're going to talk about unmasking now. So how do we get out of this mask? So, we talk about this episode, this podcast is about pausing, shifting, and igniting. And so we've talked about the pause is kind of where you recognize that you're wearing the mask. And the shifting portion of it is, you choose the spaces that you wear the mask, and how you can move forward in your day with wearing this mask. And so the unmasking is the ignition step, where we step into our authenticity and try to flourish our relationships and opportunities, and get into the healing from some of the hurt and some of the emotional damage that we may have experienced from wearing a mask. So We're going to talk about that. And stepping into the authenticity is, where I believe that your comeback really starts when you can be your authentic self. So, Frankie, what say you?
Well, I think it's crucially important when we're in the pause phase that we're self-aware. When we're doing that self-reflection during the pause, we have to be open and honest with ourselves to recognize whether or not we're wearing a mask. Because when we talk about self-reflection, we can use the analogy of looking into a mirror. And if I'm looking into the mirror with a mask on, especially the mask we had on at the top of the episode, I'm not going to see myself, and I'm not going to get the benefit from that self-reflection. So it's important for us when we're in our alone space, when we're in that pause, to take our mask off so that we can see who we really are as we're doing that self-reflection and really start to dig into, all right, what is this mask doing for me? What is this mask doing to me? And do I really need it?
Yeah, that's a good point. And the other thing to mention is that this process of removing the mask is not a cookie cutter process. It's different for everybody. And it just depends, I guess, on where you are in your journey. But Frankie, let's talk about some strategies that we can take. We know that it's not a cookie cutter process for removing the mask. We're not all going to remove the mask in the same way at the same time, in the same situations. But let's talk about some of the strategies that we can take to remove the mask.
Yeah, I mean, and like you mentioned, it is very much situationally dependent, where you are in your journey, as well as which one of the masks you're wearing. Because as we alluded to earlier, we have quite a few that we have in our repertoire that we could be wearing at any given time. But one of the most important pieces of the puzzle is having a safe space. And what I mean by safe space is a space where you can just be your genuine self, where you feel comfortable enough that you don't have to wear a mask, whether that's alone time or whether that's a trusted friend, partner, somebody that you feel like you can be your authentic self with. Because very much like you described earlier, with like, oh, when you come home from work, you're just so emotionally exhausted. You need that safe space so you can take off the mask and recuperate from the costs of that mask. And if we don't have a safe space, we really don't have an opportunity to take that mask off or those masks off and begin the regenerative process, the rejuvenation, to be able to even have our introspective moment. So having a safe space is one of the most important steps in the unmasking process.
Yeah, safe space. I couldn't agree with you more. To be around people that you know and love and trust, who are going to support you. They're going to hold you up, even if you're falling down. So having that safe space, I could not agree with you more in that. So yeah, that's great dialogue about the safe space. And I guess the other things to consider is, think of vulnerability as a superpower. Put your superhero mask on, and hopefully that can help you work through certain situations. Not long term, but you can wear that superpower mask for a period, and let go of shame, because you are enough. Whether you buy into that or believe that right now, I'm telling you that you are enough, and I'm sure Frankie will agree with that. Even without the mask, you are enough. So look in that mirror and see yourself as enough. And we've talked on this space before about journaling. And if you don't journal, consider that, because sometimes that can help you draw things out that you're not really thinking about, especially when you take an inventory of the masks that you have in your closet. It could help you draw some of that out and help you deal with some of those things. And then your inner child, what mask did you learn to wear? Frankie, you alluded to this earlier in that segment. And then decide or ask yourself throughout the day, am I being real right now? Or am I just the man or woman behind the mask? And I think that's a very important question to ask yourself. And then therapy and coaching, support groups. We've talked about therapy before in this space, and it's something that we believe that you can use to help you. And I took the liberty of just doing some searches online. And one of the things that popped up quite a bit was a site called betterhelp.com. And betterhelp.com is a website where you can go and you can speak with a therapist online. You don't even have to leave your home. And so they have a lot of different things that they do to help folks. A lot of different scenarios that you may or may fall into or know somebody who falls into. Consider it. Check it out, betterhelp.com, and see what that might be able to do for you. So anything else you want to add with that, Franky?
Yeah, as we, come to the end of the episode, I think it's important just to remember the journey we've been on in this conversation. We talked about, like when we started wearing these masks at the beginning of the episode, reminiscing about the fun we had in these masks as children during Halloween, but also to the impaired vision, the heat, difficulty breathing to achieve these objectives. We have to apply that same thinking to these masks that we wear in our adult lives. So we pause to kind of take inventory of the masks that are in our repertoire that we find ourselves wearing on a regular basis. We shift as we examine, what is it really costing me to wear these masks? And we begin our ignition as we start our unmasking process, realizing that being authentic is really where it's at, and trying to find ways that we can leave these masks in the closet to be our true selves, because we try to project these images of perfection, but it's our flaws that make us unique. And a lot of times we connect to one another on these little flaws, these little idiosyncrasies that we find in one another. So taking our masks off enables those better connections. And a mask is neither intrinsically good nor bad. It works for you or it works against you. And we have to take that time to pause, shift, and ignite to really understand what that mask is doing for us and what that mask is doing to us.
Well said. All right, folks. So if this episode resonated with you, or if you believe it can resonate with someone that you know and love and trust, please feel free to download this episode, share it with your friends and family, or direct other folks to the episode so that they can pick up some of this information that we have shared today. And Franky, tell people where they can find us.
Absolutely. So you can find the PSI Effect Podcast on just about every podcast platform. If you go to our website, thisispsipod.com, and click on the episodes link, you'll find all of the different platforms where the podcast is available. Also, you can catch us on social media at our handle @thisispsipod. And if you want to see